All right, it is 4 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. Welcome everybody to this behavioral-based interviewing workshop. My name is Aaron Woods, and I'm a career counselor in career services. The college that I primarily cover is the College of Arts and Humanities, but any of us can meet with anybody. I just spend a lot of time focusing on those majors. So today we're going to talk about behavioral-based interviewing. And some of you might know what that is. If not, I'm going to talk to you about what that means. We're going to demo some practice answers, a good answer and a bad answer. I'm going to talk to you about some resources that you have, and then, of course, any kind of questions. But before I get started, does anybody have any burning questions that are hoping to get covered in this workshop? Feel free to either put it in chat or unmute and speak up. Okay, let's get moving. So what it is. So behavioral-based interviewing is much like it sounds. It's about understanding how our past behavior, what we did in past situations, so that the employers can predict what we're going to do in future situations. And that's why it's used. It's a very, I'd say it's probably used more than it's not used. And so anytime you hear a question that's, tell me about a time when you were working in a high pressured situation and how you handled that. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker and how you handled that. It's all about framing a past experience to hear you tell that story, and then they can kind of see like, oh, how did that person handle conflict? Did they just kind of blame the other person? Did they work it out, or did they try to just put it off to the side and not deal with it? And so that is the essence of behavioral based interviewing. We're going to go through some other examples coming up. So what is kind of backing up into what's a search committee hiring manager looking for? And this workshop I did last year, and I actually worked with an HR rep from CW. And so she added some of this information in, and I thought I'd keep it in here. Just some things to think about when you are looking for that job. And this is for resume, cover letter, but also how to prep for the interview. But on the resume, just make sure you proofread for typos. It's very hard to look at a resume over and over again yourself and not miss a mistake or two. So it's always good to get another set of eyes on that, whether it's somebody that's around you or us. That's why we're here, to help you with that. References, if required, used to be resumes would have references on them, but now it's usually if an employer wants them, they'll ask for them, usually within the application process. Tailoring your application materials to the position, cover letter, resume, but also preparing for the interview. So thinking about what that job description says. That job description is really your guide on, here's what they care about, here's what I want to cover on the resume and cover letter as much as I can that's reasonable, that you actually have experience with it, but also how to prepare for that interview. What are some possible questions? If you see a lot of qualifications dealing with professional communication, that would be something I would try to cover on the resume, and be ready to talk about an example that you had either in your past work or maybe a big school project, something like that. So examples are so much powerful than saying, I'm a good communicator. Having an example of that is going to be a much more powerful answer. Don't assume that the search committee will know your experience and skills. So sometimes that can mean just spelling out what all you can do, even if it's just education. Like maybe you're getting a degree in a specific major and you haven't worked in that career. Sometimes it makes sense to do relevant coursework. List the classes that are most relevant to the job you're applying to. Include dates of employment for each position. That helps them kind of see your work history. I wouldn't worry about gaps in employment, especially if you are a traditional college age student. It's pretty much a given that, sometimes we have to focus on just school only, or maybe there's a term or two where you really had a tough one and you weren't able to work. That's fine. And if you don't have a lot of work history, that's fine as well. There's also ways to pull out experiences from volunteering, or if you're part of a student club and you did some activities there. Talking to career counselors, a lot of times somebody will come in with a resume that's half a page, and after talking for a while, we'll uncover a lot more skills that are transferable. Even like fast food or retail, there's a lot of transferable skills that you're getting in those experiences. Also include valid contact information, email, phone number, maybe a LinkedIn profile if you have one. Preparing for the interview, like I said before, the job description is your guide. And I've worked with students and we've worked a whole session on preparing for one interview. We'll open up the job description, we'll start looking through it. And what I'm usually looking for are themes, whether it's communication or maybe there's a technical theme, or they want to see that you are able to work with a diverse population. So there's a lot of just kind of inferring that, okay, there's qualifications, here are some sample questions that they're probably going to ask you. It's hard to predict every question they're going to ask you, but most interviews have a combination of general questions that are in every interview and then specific job specific ones. And we'll talk about some of those common questions coming up. And interviewing is not easy. Hardly anybody likes it. I really didn't like it. I still don't like it, but it gets easier the more you do it. And you just start to, it's kind of a mindset of understanding that you're representing your best self. You don't want to exaggerate or say things that are untrue, but you do want to use those past successes, like thinking about those times where maybe you were in a hard class or you were in a job and you weren't sure you could do it, but you overcame that. Or even just getting into school. The transition from high school to college sometimes can be a major undertaking. And so the mindset that I'm talking about is trying to kind of remind yourself of like, yeah, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, or maybe the imposter syndrome or things like that, but I got through it. I worked hard, I learned, I asked questions, and I got through it. That's the kind of mindset that I'm talking about, is bringing to the interview. So that's one example. If you're really nervous with interviewing, there are lots of little things you can do that can help that. And it's not a matter of like, you read this book or you practice this and then interviewing is going to be easy. But maybe if you take it from like a 7 out of 10, like 10 being the most anxiety provoking, most nervousness, maybe we can take that down to a 5. And little things like that are as simple as taking a deep breath between every question and answer. So if they ask you a question and maybe you know the answer right away and you could just rattle it off, build in a pause in between each answer and just kind of say, oh, let me think about that. And just take a deep breath, give yourself a chance to reset, keep yourself calm. Little things like that can really help. They can help kind of keep you calm. Just the fact that we forget to do deep breathing when we're nervous. But also, if you get a question that does take a lot of thought, and maybe your first 3 answers were really quick and you answered them right away, if you get that hard question where you do have to think about it, you've already kind of built in a structure that you take a pause between every question and answer. Let's see, what else? It's pretty rare that you're going to just get every question as great as you want. And that's okay. The interviewers aren't expecting you to, they're not expecting you not to be nervous. They know it's not a fun thing, especially for younger people. So they understand that you're going to be nervous. So it's okay. And if you are struggling with an answer, it's okay to say, hey, you know what? Let me start over. Or could you rephrase or repeat the question for me? Because that would be better than kind of just winging it and kind of stumbling along. It'd be okay to just kind of do a do-over. I wouldn't do that a lot, but it's totally fine to say, hey, you know what? I think I've lost track of where I was going. Let me start this again. Also, if you do struggle with an answer, it's okay. It's really hard not to kind of think about that, like, oh, I blew that answer, or that answer wasn't as good as I wanted. But if you continue to think about that, it's going to affect how well you answer the next questions. And there's a lot of power in, to say you have like your first 2 questions go pretty well, and then you have a question that doesn't go very well, you don't like your answer. Again, if you've done your best with that, it's easy to say, hard to do, but try to let it go, because there's a lot of power in recovering from an answer that didn't go so well. Because so much about interviewing is seeing how do you deal with adversity. And so many of those interview questions are going to be seeing how you dealt with adversity in the past. But the interview itself is an adverse situation. So seeing how you deal with that. Again, they're not expecting you to be super relaxed and chill about the whole thing. In fact, that might even look, too much of that might even look bad, like if you just look like you know everything. So just kind of figure out what works best for you, practicing, whether that's on your own or working with a career counselor. We also have some mock interview software where by video, it asks you a question, then you can record your answer through your webcam, and then you could watch your answer just to see how you do, what your nonverbal body language is like, how you said it, did it come across the way you wanted to say it. So we could talk, but I could spend this whole thing on just interview tips and strategies. So just know that if you want to work on that in a deeper dive, set an appointment with me or another career counselor, and we can focus on just general interviewing tips and strategies, or we can tailor that to a specific job or internship that you're looking for. Let's see, appearance. It's good to be professional. We do have some resources here in the career services. We have a career guide that will talk to you about ways to dress for success. We oftentimes have workshops on that. I don't think we have one this term, but at least once or twice a year, we'll have a workshop like Dress for Success. We also have a clothing closet, which has professional clothing that is free to you. And if that's something you're interested in, you can come to our career services website and just email us or call us, and then we can make an appointment. And like I was talking about the mindset, this is a time to stretch your confidence to your best self. Again, just remembering those successes that you've had, or when you've really overcome something hard, and maybe even like writing yourself a little list of those times. That could be a great little way to give yourself a pep talk for that interview, just to remind yourself that, yeah, I'm not going to know every answer that they're asking, or I'm not going to know, if I get this job, I'm not going to come in and not have any questions, but I know with hard work and listening and whatever the ways that works for you, that you can have success. And it doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes either, but just trying to have that mindset of you as your best self. So any questions on preparing for the interview? Good to see you again, Ken.
Hey, Aaron. I was gonna ask, I came in a little bit after. I was wondering if you were also providing this PowerPoint as well.
Good idea. Let me do that right now. I will share the PowerPoint on this chat. I'm having to move it to a spot so that I can attach it. So just give me a minute.
I remember you said last time if you have it open, it's it doesn't let you share it in the chat, right?
Yeah, I think it's loading now.
Ah, there it is.
Awesome. Thanks for reminding me. Okay. Any other questions that anybody has? And again, feel free to either unmute and talk or put them into the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat as we go. All right, so now that we kind of understand how to prepare for an interview, looking at the job description as your guide, tips and strategies for dealing with just anxiety and just kind of the normal stress that an interview can bring, we're going to focus on how to craft these answers. So again, past experiences are going to be very rich for your answers. If somebody says, tell me about a time when you had too many things to do and how you handled it, you talking about an exact experience is going to be a much more powerful than, if it's like, well, I didn't have one. I mean, if you don't have a work experience, it's okay to have a school experience or a volunteering experience, but try to tell that story based off of that experience. The one caveat on that is that if they're asking you a very specific instance and you just don't have that, you could kind of say, well, you know what, I don't have that experience, but I have one that's pretty similar. And you could talk about that. Or worst case, you could say, I haven't dealt with that exact experience, but here's how I would approach it. If I had too many things to do, I mean, I think any student has had that too many things to do. How did you deal with that? A sample answer for that could be, yeah, well, my fall term of my junior year, I was taking a lot of 400 level classes. It was a really busy term. I had a stats class. I had a lot to keep track of. So I kept it organized on a spreadsheet or OneNote. I made sure I had due dates. I put phone reminders in. When I had a question of like, what does this assignment really look like? I went in to talk to the professor during office hours. And then by doing these steps, by behaving in these ways, I was able to keep track of my classes, not miss any assignments, and I got good grades for that term. So that's a rough draft of an answer for a question like that. The star format, I have a diagram on the next page, but basically this is how you answer most behavioral based questions. You set up the situation. Like the example I just gave, the situation was I was a junior in this program. I was taking some very difficult classes associated with my major. And I had a lot to keep track of, more than I ever had, something like that. That's the situation. The action or actions I took were to get organized, figure out all my due dates, make phone reminders, ask questions to professors, and keep very organized. And it's okay to say also like, well, you know, a friend of mine's really organized, so I talked to her about some ideas and she showed me what she does. And I took that and I modified it and made it work for me. It's totally fine if that's one of your actions. And then the results. By doing these actions, I was able to have this success. And it's okay if you don't always have like pure success. You can still use it as an example because you could say, yeah, you know what? It was the first time I dealt with this. So I did this, I did this, I did this. It didn't, not all of it worked, but I also learned that, yeah, a schedule on my phone turned out to be the best thing for me versus a schedule in my notebook or whatever. It's okay to talk about what you learned by taking those actions. So your results don't always have to be magically like happy ending. And these answers are really a story. It's a very quick little story. And most of these kind of interview answers, 60 seconds to maybe 120 seconds, like 60 to 90 seconds is probably ideal. But if it's a big question with multi parts to it, it's okay to go over a couple minutes. If it's becoming less than 30 seconds or 45 seconds, I would start to kind of wonder if you're including enough details, if your story is rich enough, if maybe you're following the STAR format. So that's just something to kind of think about. Is a lot of the general questions I'm talking about today. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker, how you resolved it. Tell me a time that you were working under pressure, things like that. Pretty much you could do an internet search for behavioral based interview questions and you'll find hundreds of lists. And there's generally probably 10 to 20 questions that are used often, but truly depending on the job, they're going to probably make some of those specific to that job. So here's that format, that STAR format I was talking about: situation, action, result. If you can quantify the results, it's even more powerful. And that could be like, I used to have a high-tech career. I worked at Intel Corporation for 16 years, and I was working in an IT role, and we had all these computers that died because they had a defect. And so what I did is I replaced 3 capacitors in the motherboard of 200 computers and made them usable again. By doing this work, we were able to save, our department was able to save $10,000 by not having to buy new computers. That's quantifying. That could be also hours saved. That could be work saved, just in the sense of like we didn't have to do this task anymore, or this task that used to take 20 minutes now takes 5 minutes because we made these changes. Does anybody have any questions on the STAR format? Or just crafting interview answers in general? Okay. So now we're going to do a couple samples. Hey, Ken, would you mind helping me?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna have you ask me the same question twice. I'm gonna give a bad answer and we're gonna talk about it. Then I'm gonna give a good answer. We're gonna talk about it. So the question I'd like you to ask Ken is, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker and how you resolved it.
Aaron, tell me about the time you had a conflict with a coworker and tell me how you resolved it.
All right, and just to preface this is the bad answer. Oh, let me tell you about my old job. I had this boss that was a real jerk, and he just always got in my face. He always was on me, always just complaining to me. I finally had to stand up to him because I wasn't going to take it anymore. And he was about to fire me, but I just quit. So I just decided, you know what, this place isn't good enough for me, so I left. So there's the bad answer. What are some things that people notice about that answer that you think would not be such a good answer?
Seemed very reactive and very negative in the his description of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anybody else? Brandy?
I guess not necessarily the answer, but the attitude that came with it.
Yeah. Good observation. How about one more?
Mm, I guess just putting the previous employer in a bad light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great feedback from both of you. Yeah, definitely it's unprofessional. Even if it was a bad job, we don't want to show all that negativity. I didn't own any part of the responsibility. Like, hey, was there something I was doing wrong? Maybe I wasn't following directions, or maybe there's some reasons probably on my side. Most conflicts are a two-way street. Sometimes maybe it's not always 50-50, but there's there's a lot of um, there's a lot of nuance to an answer on like this, and we'll get to some of that on the good answer. But yeah, bad attitude. It's like, well, if we hire this person, are they going to be a problem with me? And if you did have a bad boss, I probably wouldn't even mention it. I would just say, yeah, you know, the workplace didn't turn out to be. I wasn't getting forward. I wasn't moving forward the way I wanted to, or I wasn't utilizing my skills the way I wanted to. I probably wouldn't address the fact that I had a really bad boss, because it's really hard to do that, to say that without it coming across as like, oh, maybe I'm just a difficult employee. But yeah, the attitude, that was a good piece of feedback. Professionalism, not owning. There's some emotional intelligence kind of thing. Ken, you were getting to that a little bit in the sense of just not looking at the situation in maybe more of a balanced way of understanding, like, yeah, like I don't hear this very often, but I'm sure it's happened. Is you could get a question like, tell me about a time that you had a difficult manager and how you dealt with it. Then you're kind of stuck. Then you have to do it. And if I had that question, I would say, well, you know, I started working for this manager and I noticed that I wasn't getting the things done that she wanted me to get done. And I was confused. So after that happened a couple of times and it wasn't getting better, I decided, you know what, I just need to make sure that I understand the expectations clearly. So I set up a meeting with that manager and I just said, hey, you know what, I noticed that I haven't been meeting your expectations in a couple ways. And it might be that the expectations weren't clear or whatever, but I'm going to own some of it to try to kind of soften it. So I'm not pointing the finger at her and saying, oh, it's your fault. But so I'm going to try to do my best to get on the same page, understand that's professional, that's good communication. Because a lot of times, so much about conflict is about not being on the same page, not having effective communication. Two people have different sets of expectations. One person maybe didn't read that one email that would change the whole thing. So a lot of this is about trying to see what is it on our side that we can work on. And if you did have a bad manager and it didn't get resolved, it's okay to say, hey, you know what? I tried all these things. It wasn't getting better. And I realized that I'm doing the best I can with the situation and it wasn't getting better. And so I had to, unfortunately, I had to leave, or I just had to kind of get used to it or something. But you showed that you took all the right steps. All right, ask me again, please, Ken. Now I'll give a good answer.
All right. Tell me about a time that you had a conflict with a coworker, and tell me how you resolved it.
So this is an actual example from my past, and I've actually used it in an interview before. And I was a program manager, project manager for software development at Intel. And I was relying on the software developer to do the work that I needed, but so was another project manager. And what kept happening is that each of us would ask this software developer to do work for us, but it was more work than that person could do. And so once I saw that that was happening, and both of me and the other project manager weren't hitting our due dates, and that poor software developer was getting pulled in two different directions, I set up a meeting for all three of us to talk. We prioritized what we needed. We made a schedule, worked with the software developer to make sure that this amount of work per week was reasonable. And then when we needed to, we would meet again. It ended up being about twice a month. And that way both project managers had an idea of what we could expect and when we could tell our customers of when these things would be done. And that software developer wasn't being pulled in two different directions. So the situation, working at Intel, software development, project management, the action I took, I set up that meeting. We got kind of everything, got on the same page. We figured out a schedule. We prioritized what we needed to be done. And then we got organized about it. And then if we needed to, we met up in the future. By doing these actions, we were able to understand when our assignments would get done. We could tell our customers, and it all got more organized. Any questions about those two answers, or any thoughts that anybody has? Anybody ready to go in software development now? Yeah, it's pretty funny. I had a psychology degree with a business minor, and I worked my way into doing software development. I don't have a computer science degree. I don't know how to code, but I was working with those people every day. So it just shows the power of what any degree that you get is a foundational degree, and if you work and do some self-learning and maybe a little bit of education here and there, you can work your way up into lots of different roles. I heard of an English major who's a CEO of a medium-sized company. So there's no limitations on whatever your degree is. Okay, the hardest questions. So the dreaded tell me about yourself question. This question on paper sounds kind of easy. It's like, well, I know myself. I can talk about myself all day. This is easy. But then when you get asked that, and you have an interviewer or a committee of interviewers looking at you, then it kind of starts into like, oh, wait, do I talk about my history, where I grew up, just my education, just my work experience? Do I talk about my hobbies? How do I actually deal with this question? And that's not fun to be figuring out on the fly. And oftentimes it's the first question, and it can be a really not a fun way to start an interview, to kind of struggle through that question. And so what I found was this diagram. I did an internship at another university doing career counseling, and I found this diagram, and you just break it into chunks. Short bio, that could be something like I lived in Oregon my whole life, in between Eugene and Portland. I had a high-tech career for 20 years. I worked at Hewlett Packard, I worked at Intel, I worked at Sony. And then I could get something personal in there, like I'm a big history buff. What else would be in my bio? I like to exercise. I like movies, TV. I wouldn't get too much into the personal stuff. I would try to keep it a little bit more of the business education, kind of like my story of how I've gotten to here. For me, it's a lot different case than for most of you, because I actually had a 20-year career already. So I would briefly talk about that and just say, yeah, I enjoyed that for a while, but then I ended up getting burned out. I just didn't find the work very meaningful. Education and training, this is where probably most of you are going to put more time. And so, and it's okay, these 30 seconds are kind of vague requirements. I think for a lot of you, the education and training will be more than 30 seconds because you might not have a lot of work history. And if your work history is not that relevant to the career you're entering into, then just minimize it. Just say, oh yeah, I had various jobs in retail or manufacturing. But if there's a job that's very specific, then I would definitely focus on that. So for me, the education and training, when I applied for this career counseling job almost 2 years ago, I was in a master's degree program. I'm in a master's degree program for counseling. I talked about that program, maybe some of what their the elements of that program are that would be important for the interviewer to know about. And then my work history is like, well, I worked at these different companies. I actually worked doing behavioral therapy for children with autism. That was very direct, so I made sure to mention that. I also mentioned my internships. I did 3 internships that were related to counseling. And then what's brought me here today? You know, when I saw this job on Indeed.com, the more I read through it, the more excited I got. And then when I looked up CWU as an institution, I was really happy about how there's so many first generation students and how this is really a nice place for people to come because it's cheaper than UW. I like a smaller town. And the more I learned about this college, the more it really felt like a good fit. So this is something you'd want to practice. Is kind of get this down because you're going to need to use this, whether it's in an interview, but it's also good to just, when you start a new job, people are going to ask, oh, tell me about yourself, or you get introduced to your new team. Oh, tell us about yourself. So you're going to get versions of this in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people call this the elevator speech. That could be a little bit quicker. The elevator speeches could be 30 seconds. Like, and the elevator speech, if you haven't heard of where that comes from, it's like you get on an elevator and it turns out the CEO of the company you're working for is in there and you have an idea or they want to know about you. How can you describe yourself in 30 to 60 seconds? So it's a version of that. In this case, if it's an interview question, kind of work on something that's 2 minutes-ish. You don't want to get into the weeds. You don't want to get too much about your personal life, but it's all a little bit about your history. Education and training are going to be very important to focus on, and whatever work history is relevant to that role. And then just kind of what's brought me here today. I want this job and here are some reasons why, or I'm a good candidate for this job and here are some reasons why. Any questions about tell me about yourselves? One of the hardest questions, kind of surprisingly hard.
This is one of the questions that is practiced in the mock interviews that are conducted in career services.
If you do a one-on-one, we can definitely do it. I always do it. And I don't know if it's one of our sample questions in our electronic Wildcat Career Network, but I would always have this one ready to go because you're probably going to get some version of this question. Sometimes you might get, why are you a good candidate for this role? Why should we hire you compared to somebody else? And there's a lot of elements in this that would be in that answer as well.
Mm. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, Shannon.
So looking at this outside of the workplace environment, can you use the same strategy relatively to like college interviews, like going into graduate programs and everything as well?
Definitely. It's there. I would probably focus a little bit more on, like, when I did my master's degree program in counseling, we did have an interview process, and that's where I would say, well, I got a psychology undergrad. The only thing that was really interesting to me was counseling, but I was still pretty young, so I decided to focus on my high-tech career. But I never let go of that feeling of wanting to help people, feeling like it's really meaningful work. And so I ended up going back eventually and telling, and so just kind of telling that story of what's true for you. And like, that could be as simple as, like, in high school, I took this one class, and this one class changed my whole future. For me, it was taking psychology at a community college. I fell in love with psychology back in 2000. And so I could tell that story.
Okay, so would you want to focus more on like education in that aspect if you don't have like a lot of training in? Okay,
Definitely, but also your passion. If you have a,
Okay.
yeah, that's where you get the cover letter and the question like this is you get to talk about yourself, not so much about your skills and your education. But yeah, it's like, I always wanted to do work that was meaningful, and I kept doing career development for myself in my high tech career, and I found myself really enjoying doing it for others I was working with, which is all true. And that's what told me, like, okay, I need to switch what I'm doing because I like this little part about my high tech career. Now I want to make it my full career by doing that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Any others?
Would you say like the tell me about yourself question, like you just have to kind of dig deep and know kind of know yourself, like why,
I don't,
you know?
you don't necessarily have to dig deep. I mean, you might want to in a sense of just kind of what is most important to you, like a value or where you're heading in life, or if there is like a, here's where what I find meaningful and it's related to that career, that might be the digging, but you don't have to get, I think you just start out with the chunks of like how you want to do that. And we can work on this together with career counseling as well. But once I found this way to break it up, if this question really got a lot easier for me. And once now I show it to everybody because it's so much less overwhelming to break it up into chunks.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions? Okay. So another one that a lot of people don't like is tell me about a weakness that you have and how you manage it. Anybody want to answer that one right now? Go. All right. This one's tricky because you want to be transparent, you want to be honest, but what you don't want to do is kind of make it really short and say, yeah, I'm not really good at working with people, period. You might, if that was true, and I hope you're not going into a career where you have to work with a lot of people, like you're doing public relations or something like that. But let's say that you're into software development, and this is where you could say, yeah, I'm an introvert, and I knew that growing up, I knew that in high school, but I also knew that I was going to need to work on that. So in college, I made sure to take a couple speech classes to force me to get better at that. I also joined a couple of student clubs and then took on like a member of one of those student clubs to get myself more practice at working with others. And while it's still something I'm working on, I've made a lot of improvement, and I'm going to continue to look at ways and talk to people about how they do it, because there's a lot of introverts out there, and it's an extroverted world, especially in business world, and so a lot of introverts can struggle with that. But basically, you want to show that you know what that weakness is, you know how it could affect your career or how it will affect your career, that you've made some progress on it, you've taken some steps to make some progress on it, and it's still something you're working on. Because if it's a weakness that you solved, then it's not a weakness anymore. Any questions on that? Anybody want to dig into that one a little bit more?
I was gonna say, like what you just said is kind of relevant, like kind of like my story, because like I noticed that about myself too. In my past, like I would find it hard to communicate or just meet people. So I took the time to kind of invest in my ability to communicate and be more comfortable getting to learn meet new people by like I read some books like this one right here, actually I'm reading right now. If you don't mind me showing you, like this one.
Oh yeah, I've read that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, and other books like that. Like I've picked up the habit of reading personal development books to help myself, just personally, but also like professionally as well.
Perfect. That would be great to include in your answer. It's like, yeah, I've known this is something that I have to work on. So I've read these books. I mean, just showing that book right there is powerful. It's like, yeah, I'm actively working on it because it's something I know I'm going to need to work on. And it's not that you need to fix your introversion. That's not really actually possible because we're kind of born with those traits. But trying to figure out a way to learn, to stretch, to make it easier. Just like I said, at the 18 to 22 years old, I did not like interviewing. I was definitely very nervous, but the more I did it, the easier it got. Presenting and doing workshops and facilitating workshops, not something that like, oh boy, I look forward to doing that. But now that the more I do it, the easier it gets and the more comfortable I am. I still have some anxiety or whatever, but I've just done it so many times that now I'm kind of over some of that and I can relax a little bit more, but also just not take it too seriously. Like, oh, I'm gonna mess up and I'm gonna ruin anybody's life. I'll just admit that if I made a mistake or I missed something or, but yeah, great addition, Ken. Thank you. A very similar one is tell me about a time you made a mistake and how you resolved it. And again, that's not a fun one because you're saying like, yeah, I made this mistake. So much about this is you being a professional. You don't want to hide the mistake. You don't want to like hope that it doesn't happen and not tell anybody. So just think about a time when something happened and something got missed and you know, an ideal answer would be, let's see. I don't think this is exactly my story, but it's very similar to things that happened in my past at Intel where, yeah, we had this software revision that we released. And once we released it, we figured out there was an issue and it wasn't allowing people to interact with this device in the way that they were used to. And so what I did is I immediately told my manager and we communicated it to our manufacturing staff that, hey, everybody, we have this issue. We're working on it right now. Here's the timeline when we're going to resolve it. I definitely want to be upfront about something like that because I don't want to hide it. I want to, you know, get it out there as soon as possible to reduce the damage of it. And then what I did was I set up a meeting with the software developer to see, could we do something with this quickly to fix it, or should we revert back to our previous software version? And then based on that conversation, we could either make that change really quick, I communicate to the team as quickly as possible, or maybe I figure out a workaround, or we just say, you know what, we're not going to fix it quick enough, we're affecting manufacturing, so we're going to back out of this software version and go back to the old one. So, and then talk about what you learned. The real gold of this answer is what did you learn from this? Did I look at what are the ways that this next software revision could affect things? What did I miss that I didn't see this happening? How could I make this not happen in the future? That's the real gold of this answer is, am I taking any steps to reduce this from happening in the future? Any comments or thoughts about the mistakes made? All right. What if scenarios? And this will probably be a little bit more into specific jobs that you're applying to, but basically they're trying to put you in a situation of, let's say you have a role that you're going to be dealing with customers directly. What if you were a salesperson for this device and the customer is really upset because they didn't get the device that they ordered or they didn't get the right one? How would you deal with that? So it's just like all the other questions. Tell me about a time you were in a situation. Now, if you don't have an example, then you kind of go with the, if I was in this scenario, here are the steps I would take. And that's fine because you're not going to have these exact examples for some of these questions. And on that one, particular one, it would be, well, first off, I would apologize to the customer. I would make sure that I would try to figure out, did something happen with our ordering system? Was there a mistake on our side? Try to figure out what exactly happened and how. I would call that customer directly. I would say, I would ask those questions, try to figure out what exactly happened. And then I would, as quickly as possible, resolve it. Keep in constant communication with this customer. If we were shipping something new out, when they could get it, try to put a rush on it. And then if there was a flaw in our ordering system, I would escalate that to the right people, software developers, vendor, whoever that is, to try to reduce that from happening again. Conflict resolution. So I think we covered that pretty well. So much about that is just, are you communicating effectively? Are you on the same page? Staying professional, even if the other person is not getting into like an argument. Like, it's okay to say, hey, you know what, this person was really upset and I was trying to communicate my point of view to this person, but they were super upset. So I just had to say, you know what, let's let's take a break and then let's talk in an hour. I'll set up a meeting or something. Or let's take a walk and try to, you know, come back and talk about this when we're a little bit more calm, and then answer the rest of the question. But there are times where that conflict one, you've done everything right and it still didn't go well, and that's okay. Just the fact that you did all the right things, there might be times where you have to say, yeah, you know what, I did all these steps, it didn't work, and so I decided, you know, I don't want to have to, you know, utilize our supervisor, but we weren't getting resolution, so we both went to the supervisor and all hashed it out together, and we were able to come to an understanding or an agreement. That's okay to have in that answer. Any other hard questions that anybody can think of that when they get them, they're like, oh man, I hate that question? All right. Yes.
Oh, I was gonna say, I guess on the flip side of the weaknesses, like when you're asked about your strengths, I guess that was also a hard question.
Yeah, especially for people, especially probably for introverts, especially for people that are kind of humble, don't want to brag. That's that kind of stretching yourself, and that's where you want to remember kind of feedback you've gotten from past employers, supervisors, maybe even professors or friends. Like if you're somebody that people always come to when they have an issue about something, maybe you're a computer whiz. I've always been that for my family, or trying to understand like a dynamic of a group, or oh, I don't really understand this particular subject, could you help me with that? So just remembering all those times where you got complimented on what you're good at, or the feedback you gotten from past employers, or yeah, you know what, I'm pretty organized. I'm able to stay pretty organized. I keep reminders. I do this, I do that. If you can't think of any, that could be a conversation with somebody like me. A lot of times just having a conversation, we can pull those things out. As a culture and maybe as a species, we usually focus on the negative, like here are my shortcomings. We don't focus so much on what we do have to offer. So sometimes it takes some brainstorming and writing stuff down. This is a little piece of homework for you if you can't think of any, just to kind of think about those times where you got good feedback, or just ask your friends and family, people that you trust, people that you think are have a good perspective. Just say, hey, what do you think my strengths are? And you might get some data from that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with that, it's a balance. You don't want to brag like, oh, I am so good at this. Let me tell you that I'm going to come in there, I'm going to show your guys or your staff how to do this. You don't want to get into that realm, but it's okay to say, yeah, you know what, I was always told that I'm really tactful when I have a difficult conversation, and it took me a while to kind of see that, but now I do get it, and it's not something like I say, hey everybody, look at me, I can do this, but it's just something that I've gotten comfortable with, and I feel like I have a pretty good skill at working with people when I have to have a difficult conversation. That could be an example. Okay. The end of the interview and follow-ups. So interviews are oftentimes looked at as like they're interviewing you, but that's not true. You are interviewing them. It is much more of a them interviewing you than you interviewing them, but almost always they're going to say, do you have questions? Say yes, and always have some questions. And this doesn't have to be like you need to spend 3 hours thinking of questions for them. I'm going to have some sample questions that you can use. You could also just do an internet search on questions for interviewers. There's hundreds of lists out there. I would always have like 4 or 5 in my pocket ready to ask, and you could even bring those with you to the interview. That's fine. But if you don't ask them any questions, it could look bad. They might think like, wow, this person doesn't really care about this job very much, or hasn't really thought about what this job is. So it could look negative if you don't have questions to ask them. Definitely thinking about questions that are relevant to the job and the company. Don't ask questions that you can find the answer to easily on their website. That could look bad. So thinking, sometimes if you're relaxed enough or you're talking about certain things in the interview, you might think of a question during the interview, and that's okay to write down. You could, like in between a question, it's like, oh, you know what, I want to write down a question for later. but I would always have like 4 or 5 questions ready to go that you can ask in an interview. It's okay to ask about the timeline for the decision, but we don't normally talk about pay or ask about pay and benefits. That should be more when they give you an offer letter. Now, there are times where they're going to ask you, what kind of pay are you looking for? And that can be a little bit difficult. There is ways to figure out what you're worth. And we have some databases that we can talk to you about on how to find like average beginning salary, even to the point of within this region in Washington, here's what you should be expecting to make. So you can walk in with a clue about what you're worth. That way you're not just shortchanging yourself, or you're being reasonable. You don't want to, ask 15,000 over what they want to ask, because they might just reject you right there. But it's good to kind of say, well, you know what, I've looked at a few databases and it looks like entry level for this role is typically between 50,000 and 53,000. So I was hoping to be in that range. Or if you have experience, relevant experience, and you say, yeah, I saw beginning was 50 to 53,000. I was able to do some part-time work in this. I was able to do a 3-month internship. So I feel like I'm not brand new to this. So I was hoping to be on the higher end of that 53,000, or maybe even more if that's possible. It's so important to try to set that stage as quickly as possible, because other people are doing it and they might make 5,000 more starting out. And it's all because they just asked, or they had that homework. And it's really hard for that person that's making 5,000 less to ever catch up to the person that's making 5,000 more. And so it's not a real comfortable feeling to do that in an interview, but you got to make sure that you're going to not resent the job, because you don't want to get to that job, have it be your first job, and then 6 months later you figure out that, man, I'm making so much less than I should be making. I'm gonna have to leave this job. And then you have to kind of like, oh, do I even list this job? It's only a few months long or 6 months long. And then you have to be ready to talk about that in the next interview. So especially if it's a deal breaker, like if you want to live in Seattle and you know what it takes to live in Seattle, and some employer is going to offer you $10,000 less, if you can't make it work, you need to know that. And that's part of you interviewing them. So again, if they're asking for that information, now if you get the offer letter negotiation, there's a whole thing on pay negotiation that we could talk about as well. That's something you could talk to us with, and there's also lots on the internet for that. But it's really important to kind of know what you're worth so that you can give them a general range, because that could be the deal breaker for you, or it could be a deal breaker for them. Other questions that you could ask them, I have some on the next slide that we'll go through. Always good to email, phone, or write a thank you note to the interviewers. It's very professional. It helps them remember who you are. I remember this HR representative at another university who had a card on her desk from somebody that thanked her for the interview. She had that card on her desk 4 years later. She remembered that person's name. So a written card or a written note could even be more powerful than an email or a phone call. I would go email before I would go phone call. Phone call would be last resort, but if you have the ability to do a written letter, that could be a way to stand out compared to others. So here are some common questions that you can ask. Most of these can be used in any interview. Oh wait, that's not the right list. Okay. So these are common questions. That's right. These are common questions that you might get asked in any interview. So tell us about yourself, why you're in this position. We went through that. Weakness question, conflict. Where would you like to be in 5 years with your career? That could be something, and you don't have to have the perfect answer for that, because it's pretty impossible, especially if you're starting into your career. You might not even know like what's the promotions are like in that. That could be a question for the interviewer at the end of the interview is, hey, talk to me about how people progress within this career and within your company. But if you get asked this question, where would you like to be in 5 years? If you don't have a lot of data on like what that could look like, it's okay to be general. It's okay to say, hey, I want to become competent and then very proficient in the job that I get. I want to continue to keep learning. I want to continue to keep growing. If that means promotions or taking on new responsibilities, if you have some ideas about where you want to go, like, I I want to start with software development, but I also like people management, and I would like to build up those skills and maybe someday be a people manager of software developers. Just if you have that kind of detail, that's great. If not, it's okay to just be kind of general and like, I want to keep progressing. I would like to, see what avenues are there. Maybe if you know more schoolings in your future, it's okay to mention that, unless I wouldn't say like, yeah, in 2 years, I'm going to quit and go to grad school. But if you think like, yeah, I'm getting this bachelor's degree, and at some point I might do a master's degree on the side. Now, some of these companies will actually pay for that. Intel actually would pay for master's degrees and PhDs and bachelor's degrees of related fields. So some companies actually support that. I think even Amazon's doing it now, and Starbucks has been doing it for a while. Yeah, and then what questions do you have for us? So some other questions, some general questions. Again, you can do an internet search on these, find a lot, but I think a question that I would always have ready for an interviewer is, what do you like about this job? Or what do you like about working here? Or what are some challenges of working in this role that people come across? I'm also a fan of like, how do people, like, what are some things that successful people do in this role? So you're already thinking ahead, like if I get this job, I want to know like how to be successful. That would be a great thing to ask the manager right when you get that job too, like in that first one-on-one or that meeting or whatever. But this could be something to ask them in the interview. If you've done some research on the company and you saw that they have some new initiative and it's interesting to you, that could show that you've done some homework. If you say, hey, I saw that you just launched this new program. I'm curious, are you going to keep launching programs like that or expand upon that program? Maybe you have an idea or two. It's just like, yeah, I'm really interested in that. I've actually thought about doing things like that myself. That could really help you stand out compared to just some basic questions. So, okay, so we are almost out of time. This is our website. This is our list of workshops. You probably found that just to find this one. Here is our general email. Here's my email. If you would be so kind, we have a survey. It's pretty quick. You can do with a QR code with your phone, or you can use this link. I'll actually put that in the chat when I'm done sharing. Help us help you better. We can always make these workshops better, or if you have some other ideas, please let us know. So got a few minutes for questions. So does anybody have any questions? Ken.
Yeah. So you said that we can go on the Career Fair Plus app to schedule mock interviews, right?
Wildcat Career Network.
Oh, Wildcat Career Network. Okay.
Yeah. Career Fair Plus is an application for our career fairs that are going on right now. And I just had a workshop Monday. Was that Monday?
Yeah, I think it was
Tuesday?
I think it was Monday. Yeah.
So if anybody's interested in career fair, we're actually having we're doing some tabling at the Cirque on Wednesdays at noon and Mondays at 5 p.m. We have some of our student workers there showing you how to use it, but you can let us know on if you're interested in the career fair. Our website has some info as well, but that's an application we're using for our career fairs. Wildcat Career Network is an application that we use to post internships and jobs. We also have a feature in there to do mock interviewing, where it's kind of an AI interviewing, where there'll be a video that asks you a question, you record that, and then you can watch your answer, or you could do that and then meet with me and we could analyze that answer, or we can just do a mock interview together. We do a lot of that too.
Okay. In that case, the in-person one, I could just send an email, right, and then set up an appointment to do the okay.
Yeah, in fact, let me show you how to access career services and how to make an appointment with me. Okay, so from any CW page, student services, career services, drop in or make an appointment with our staff. Mostly it's make an appointment these days because we're still dealing with COVID. So there's my how to make an appointment or email. We do have career counselors per college, except for College of Education and Professional Studies right now. We're hiring for that role, hopefully fairly soon. If you had internship questions, we have somebody for there. But in person and virtual, a little bit more virtual now than in person. But you can meet with any of us. I meet with people that are not part of College of Arts and Humanities, so that's fine. Especially if you have if you want to work in high tech, I could talk a lot about that. So we also have resources, and there are some resources in here for resumes, interviewing resources, mock interviewing, and how to make an appointment to work with us or use the mock interview software in Wildcat Career Network. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. We are ending right on time. So have a great evening. And yeah, I hope to see some of you in the future. And by the way, any CW student has career service access for life, which a lot of colleges is just 1 year, but we actually do it for life. All right. Thanks, everyone.